frozen substrates, probably playing at about a 240.
Wow.
Yep, and we've measured that. So, did I answer you? The answer to your question is that after that initial settle-in period, there could be an opportunity to come back and do some supplemental infill, but that's in the contract as we have specified it. You own that.
Any statistics on the relative injuries on a field like this versus a natural turf field?
Yep. The problem with making that evaluation is that natural turf fields vary all over the place. Your natural turf field isn't the same as Norwood's natural turf field. So there's a problem inherent in that. But the best statistics are from the NCAA and from the NFL. And what they show is that the infilled synthetic turf fields have a slightly better, not significantly better, a slightly better injury rate than a very, very high-end, well-maintained, irrigated, rested, aerated natural turf field. And much better statistics than the common run-of-the-mill Massachusetts public high school field. And way, way, way better than AstroTurf. AstroTurf was a very marginal product as it related to knee and ankle injuries because of the footlock issue. Athlete's foot would get caught up in the nape of the nylon. He or she would get hit laterally, particularly young women in their hips. And the foot wouldn't release, and you sustain some pretty bad injuries. In the infill product, because the turf shoe, which is a normal football shoe or soccer shoe, can rotate in the infill on top of the carpet, much like it does in a natural grass scenario, you get a better release and you preclude those types of injuries. Sir, you have a question?
Yeah, you mentioned the replacement costs. And you mentioned the UMass Lowell field was put in around 1999, 2000. Is that still the original field there?
It's funny you should ask. I did the pre-construction conference for the turf replacement last Friday. There is a contract in place to replace that field at the end of this season.
So it's got 10 years on it?
It will have. And one of the things you have to remember is that was the very, very, very original fiber. The technology has changed substantially. They've gone from what was called a slit film, which is, I won't bore you, to a tufted monofilament, which is a bit more rugged. The UV coatings have improved. I can't tell you how long that field is going to last because the oldest monofilament fields are about 2.5 years old.
When you come in, is it as simple as just ripping out the carpet?
Another really good question. We're about to find out. First of all, we have ascertained that this is landfillable, inert material. So there's no question about the disposal of it. We also think that it can be recycled, but we don't know that yet. Yes, if you spend the money to get the sub-base right, if you put in the right drainage, if you put in the right stone, if you put in the right anchor curb, and if you build the infrastructure correctly, it is indeed as simple as taking a vacuum truck, sucking out the infill, taking a utility knife, cutting out the carpet, laying down a new carpet, putting down new infill, and calling it a day. It's a very different project. It's a 30-day project as opposed to a 120-day project, as we're about to find out. And I'm going to watch this one very closely, and I'm going to write a really cool paper.
Well, we had a representative from Field Turf make a presentation to the selectmen, and he's a gentleman, his company put in Gillette Stadium's new synthetic turf. Bob Kraft asked the question, how many years should we expect to get out of this? And he has the latest generation, the most current generation, something that we would be entertaining here. And he was quoted approximately 15 years. According to that gentleman, now I don't know all that goes on in Gillette, he said that field takes to be in the NFL, professional soccer, all of the halftime shows, bringing trucks and things on it. He claims it takes an absolute beat.
That field, and I like Mr. Chapman a great deal, and I respect his work a great deal. That field doesn't nearly take the beating that your field will take. The UMass Lowell field was used 2 to 3 times a day, every single day. The municipal users, the youth sport users, intramurals, they had football for the first several years, soccer, varsity and JV, field hockey, lacrosse men's, lacrosse women's. There were people cycling on and off that field every freaking day. The Gillette Stadium just doesn't realize that same type of use. On the other hand, I don't think use breaks these fields down. I think you could have two, my theory is, you could have two fields side by side, one a practice field, everyday use, and one a game field. I think they'll fail at the same time. What really makes your field fail, that gentleman's got a water bottle in his hand. That water bottle is the same polyethylene that's in the tufted carpet. If you put that water bottle at the beach, if you leave it for 15 years and you walk up to it, you can break it up in your hand. It's the same phenomenon. I think a field in Massachusetts is going to last twice as long as a field in Arizona for very much the same reasons.
When it starts breaking down, when's the downhill side of it? Is it after 5 years, 6 years?
Again, I can tell you what the laboratory treadmill tests say. I can't tell you what the field experience is because it's relatively new.
I was just wondering,
The
UMass
UMass
Lowell, what was
Lowell.
it that indicated to them that, okay, we need to replace this?
About a year and a half ago, in the drainage ditch along the side of the field, much like the one I described to you, it was filling with broken fibers. The fibers were breaking off, just like I would predict that Coke bottle would break off if you stepped on it. I think that's what's going to happen. The new monofilaments, and again, I won't make your eyes glaze over too much, the new monofilaments, rather than being a single half-inch thread tufted through the carpet and then ripped open to fibrillate to derive that grass-like appearance, is 6 or 7 pieces of monofilament that are bunched and then tufted through the carpet. They're very, very uniform, and the surface area ratio of each individual one is much, much less than the surface area ratio of the old slit film, and it's the surface area ratio that defines how much UV exposure the fibers have. The testing machines in Dalton, Georgia, and I've seen the tests and I've seen the data, is it reliable? I don't know. They suggest that the new fibers, the new yarns are going to last twice as long before they break down. I think 12 is a good number. I think 15 would be great. Yes, sir.
How is the field installed? Is it seamless to roll out?
Great question. It comes in 15-foot lengths, 15-foot rolls, and they're rolled transverse across the longitudinal axis of the field side by side. And then it's a double bagger stitch, like a dog food bag stitch, that stitches them together. What's cool about 15 feet?
Replace it?
5 yards.
Bingo. The first 4 inches of every roll have a 4-inch white stripe,
Right.
so that the stripes are already built in. So you stretch it out, you cut it trim at the sideline, and then you roll what are called header strips the whole length of the field, which have another big foot-wide white stripe, which is your sideline. So we've got the field in, we've done a minimal amount of stitching, and we have most of the lines in that were installed at the factory.
Now what about the lines for the other sports?
Yep. What they do, and this varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, different people do it differently. What Field Turf does is where there's a red line for soccer that couldn't be tufted in the factory, and we try to get them to tuft as much in the factory as they can so that it's built right into the carpet. Where they can't do that, they'll shave it absolutely bare, and they'll applique, inlay a piece of red in the shaved area. They do it with a glue that's 800 degrees Fahrenheit, which does two things. It hot glues it under all weather conditions, but it also melts the residual nubs from where it has been shaved. It's so hot that it melts the plastic, so that the difference in the height of the fibers from one side of the line to the other side of the line is minimal. It's only the thickness of the backing, and it's imperceptible. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Can you replace sections?
Good question. My favorite story as it relates to that is Catholic Memorial. They've got a crosstown rival, Severian Brothers, and they play their Thanksgiving Day game against Severian Brothers. Night before the game, the year after they got their field in, Severian Brothers kids, you know those Catholics, damn, jumped the fence with a gallon of gasoline, circumscribed a $15,000 logo, and touched it off. The good news is it was self-limiting. It didn't propagate. It extinguished once the accelerant burned out. It melted the plastic. They called Field Turf. Field Turf sent a crew. They were there at 10 o'clock the next morning. They sucked out what infill they could. They took a utility knife, they cut a circle, they took a generic green patch, they put it back in, they stitched it, or they glued it in that case. Put the infill back, they groomed the whole field, they played the game at 1 o'clock. The short answer to your question is, yeah, you can patch it. One of the things that we do sometimes, we don't do it all the time, For our higher end, Dartmouth, West Point, we buy an additional roll of turf, and we spread it out on a rooftop someplace, and we ballast it. It then experiences the same color fade and the same UV exposure as the field as a whole, so that at some point in the life of the carpet, if you do need to do a patch, in a goal mouth for an example, you've got turf that's essentially the same dye line that has had the same experience. Other questions? I'm done. Tom?
Thank you, Bill. You can leave it there for a second. You know, one of the things that we talked about right from the first time that we actually made a presentation was one of the things that are critical to the project and how can we garner the support of everybody involved, which was to ensure that we kept to whatever we contracted for, we had assurance of funding, especially in this environment. Everybody has heard that the Hillview Commission has agreed to bond up to $2 million for the project. Now, Mr. Chairman asked on more than one occasion last week, what are we going to get now for this $2 million? And I think it's important that we kind of walk through this. Ed? What we want to recommend here is that we initially construct three key elements of the overall project. 2 fields, which includes the synthetic surface itself, the practice field, which would be natural grass, the track, and the fencing to ensure that we stay within that budget. With that, I'm going to bring Bill back in a moment to walk through the detailed budget that we are proposing. With that we can come in slightly under that $2 million. Now, all along we have said that this entire project is indeed a phased project, that it's modular, if you will, and that as funding is available, whether it be through grants or fundraising or any other area, that we would then move on and fund the remaining portions of the entire project as outlined in the vision of the project. What would be remaining as far as details and major phases would be the lighting, would be the grandstands, and then you cannot, at least as far as we know now, you cannot have bathrooms in public facilities if you have grandstands based on the code as it's written today. Now, Bill already outlined that in the vast majority of cases, they have sought for and have been granted relief. There's an awful lot of ambiguity as to what that's going to cost. Bill had recommended in his expert opinion, based on the facility, 1,000 seats, that in all likelihood, $248,000 would probably be what it would take. But again, there's no guarantees. Mr. Delaney said, I think then if you want to put the proposal in place, you ought to put in the budget what would be the maximum as written in the code. And that could be substantially more than $248,000. And quite frankly, there aren't any guarantees. In this case, we can assure with great confidence that we can get the field in play, we can get all the varsity teams that are outlined to play on that field to play within a very reasonable time frame. We're shooting for what would be that Thanksgiving time frame. The youth groups could take advantage of it. The practice fields would be done and overseeded. You'd have the track in play and the fencing that's associated with that. That would allow for the town to expand the amount of playable fields, which was the impetus for the project in the first place, and we could get moving. And again, we can do that for under $2 million.
Tom, could you just elaborate on one point? So the initial design phase will incorporate future lighting, grandstands, bathrooms, concession.
Yes.
Phased in, but the initial design will include all that.
Yes.
You could just speak to some people may not know where the practice field is and how we're going to use the topsoil, the football field for that.
I think what I'll do, Ed, if you don't mind, I'll turn it back over to Bill. He's a little bit more suited for it than I. And Bill will walk through the budget and then some of your questions.
Thanks. Again, as I understand the decisions that the working group has made, the phase 1 initial project, and yes, our proposal to the committee is for full design construction documents of the lighting, of the seating, the press box, the track,